Hello and Happy New Year. We are back with Layback with Betfair. I am Tom Haylock. We've got the first major tennis tournament of the season or the year coming up in the Australian Open, and no better man to join me than Steve Quick from Ace Previews. How are you, great man?
Not too bad, thanks. Thanks very much for having me in.
It's good to have you here, and you're the expert in tennis. I've got to admit I'm not the best, especially with the pronunciations of some of these players, but want to get your background. Obviously, Ace_Previews on Twitter. That's right.
Yep, correct.
You've obviously very well known to Betfair people, and you've been doing some work with SEN through us. You've been doing previews on the Hub. Your work is fantastic. Very knowledgeable in all things tennis, mates. What's your background? How did you get into it?
I mean, initially it's just more coming from growing up playing tennis. So I picked up a racket at a very early age, played tennis all the way through. And when I left school, the job kind of path that I went down didn't involve tennis, didn't involve maths, which I really liked at school. So I thought, when I started to kind of be a bit more aware of the tennis tour across the year and what was going on and, the possibilities that could come with it, it just kind of is something that naturally kind of evolved from when I was 18, 19. And now we're over a decade later and things have certainly evolved. But yeah, it's just been a passion. I watch the tour year round anyway, yes. And then bringing that maths kind of background into it and knowing enough about players and what's going on, and particularly with tennis, it's so subjective in a lot of ways. If you compare to some of the other sports like AFL and NFL, you've got a match every week. Everyone's primed for that. Yep. You know kind of what's going to be involved in that match. But when you look at tennis, people could be coming from different continents, coming off a quick backup, being off for 3 weeks, and I guess having an intimate knowledge of all of that has really held me in good stead over the last decade.
So there's probably a less mathematical base and database in that regard because there's so many different elements. But how much does maths and data come into it in what you do?
Yeah,
or is it more just feel and following and watching the matches? There
is an element. I think there are, and not just for myself, there are some people who are very data heavy and just focus just on the data. Yep. Whereas it's kind of trying to find that balance a little bit of knowing what the data is telling you around, serve hold percentage and break percentage and what players are doing across their matches, across the short, medium, long term, but then also knowing these other factors, like
travel.
Are they traveling from one continent to another and have to play the next day? Those kind of things, to know what impact that will have on a match as well.
And in terms of surfaces, obviously we've got different surfaces around the world, and I assume all tournaments throughout the world in the circuit play differently as well, and you've got to watch those and factor those in.
Yep, definitely. So surface speed and different hard courts can play at different speeds, and then you obviously got the clay and the grass as well. Other things like altitude, so a lot of tournaments are played at higher altitude, so the balls kind of zip through the air a little bit quicker and it favours the bigger servers. So there's lots of things that you do need to consider, but I think that's kind of what makes it enjoyable, that there isn't just everyone's going to be playing in the same conditions every week and everything's perfect, that there is a lot of variability. I think that is what appeals.
Yep. Australian Open's the first tournament of the year. They're coming off somewhat of a break. You were telling me earlier, obviously a lot of players haven't played for the end of last season, mid-November. They're coming off a break. How does that influence the Australian Open? I imagine there's a bit of unknown going into the first tournament of the year.
Yeah, definitely. So there is unknown, and it's it's almost the equivalent of an AFL team having a pre-season and then going straight to the finals. They're going kind of from 0 to 100 straight away. So knowing how players kind of finished the end of the year last year and then looking at how, that can impact potentially, their off-season or their pre-season, how well they've trained, if they've had any injuries, those sort of things. You only really get the fortnight before the Australian Open to really try and figure all that out. So it's challenging. It can make the Australian Open challenging as a spectacle, but, there's a lot of quality tennis, and at the end of the day, all the players who are coming are giving 100%. So that motivation isn't going to be an issue.
True. Maybe for some.
Maybe.
Curious, maybe. We'll see. How do you go about betting? Obviously, Betfair, you've got the ability to lay and trade and back. We'll talk about trading a bit coming up as well and what you do and a bit of a back-to-school segment. But do you trade a lot? Do you just bet head-to-head? Do you bet lines? All of it? Wherever you've got an edge?
Yeah, it's basically all of it. But a lot of it in the first instance is pre-match. There is a lot of that, but I will generally get involved more so in kind of the outright markets, as you see matches unfold across the course of a tournament. If you're sitting there and you're particularly watching, during the Australian Open in particular, if you've got players who are, starting to stretch between points, or you feel like they're kind of on the verge of cramping or something's about to go amiss, then you can jump in and try and get those longer odds there, because things can turn very, very quickly, such as the nature of the tennis scoring system. But yeah, look, it's a bit of a mixed bag. It's a bit of everything. I think there's so many options, and tennis is played 11 months of the year every day, so there's plenty of options about.
That's the beauty of Betfair as well. There's so many options with trading and lay betting and back betting, obviously, and we'll talk a bit more about that. You've watched the shows before. You might be aware that we do a little thing called a lay bin, where a couple of our guests come in and get fired up about something that's making them grumpy.
Yep.
I've got plenty. The new year hasn't been kind to me. What, you got anything for us?
Look,
any tennis related, any personal stuff?
Look, there's plenty of tennis ones, but I'll stick it to a couple, and I'll leave a certain men's tennis player from Australia out of it for now.
Oh, come on, fire up.
Well, we'll start off with the first one. So the first one I have is, look, it's Tennis Australia and giving Venus Williams a wild card for the Australian Open this year. So
yeah, right.
She's 42 years of age. Just to give you a bit of a background of her form coming into the Australian Open. So since the start of 2020, she's won 5 matches.
Yes.
And lost 21.
Yeah, all right.
So she's not playing a lot.
How old is she? 42?
42.
Yeah.
So we obviously saw Serena kind of get the farewell that maybe wasn't a farewell, but we're still not sure. Could be a farewell at the US Open last year. That's another lay bin topic. maybe for another show.
There's a few of them.
There's a few of them. But they've given Venus Williams a wild card here instead of giving it to a young Australian to give them an opportunity. And I think, Australian tennis players and women's players in particular, there's been so many who are kind of sitting through that kind of, 100, 200, 300 rankings in the world. They're investing a lot of money to kind of travel around to try and find these tournaments throughout the year to be able to, boost their ranking. If you lose the first round of the Australian Open, you get over $100,000, which for a young...
Can I get a wild card?
Yeah, exactly. So for a young women's tennis player...
Yes.
Or anyone who's outside that top 100, that's massive in terms of that earning ability compared to their week to week. I just don't know if
Venus doesn't need the 100,000.
I don't think she needs 100,000, but I don't think she moves the needle in the same way that Serena does in terms of I just don't know that she's bringing the same.
I don't know.
To the same extent.
There'd be not to the same extent as Serena, the GOAT, but you'd think that a lot more people would watch Venus at 42 than a no-name Australian at 200.
Potentially, but I think it's also it's trying to find that balance, and I think they're trying to obviously encourage that viewing in, and obviously Serena is gone, but they also got a couple of matches out of Serena at the US Open.
Yep.
Whereas I just don't know we're going to see that with Venus. So I think she's just taking some wild cards. She hasn't really announced whether it's the end or anything. I just wonder if that's just causing a bit of an issue there. But the other one is the United Cup that's been on the, it started in the last week or so. I think.
Now, Kyrgios pulled out of this at the last minute. Is that right?
Yeah, I think he pulled out about 10 minutes before Leighton Hewitt had to front the media.
Big stuff here. That's in the lay bin.
Yeah, that's...
we couldn't go a lay bin without mentioning.
No, exactly.
Sure.
So, look, well, in a way, they've had a difficult relationship for a number of years now.
Yeah.
Yet Leighton has that mantle of the coach of, the captain of all of these men's teams, pretty consistently without any, query or question. Look what happened in the cricket when Justin Langer perhaps lost some of the support of the top players.
That should be in the lay bin, that whole situation. Well, that just fired me up even further.
Yeah. So, looking at that no one's really questioning Leighton's spot when he doesn't know how to handle the best player, who's someone who will, when you're playing ties that are only 3 matches or 5 matches, you put Kyrgios in for 1 or 2.
Yeah.
You bring Kokonakis in as well, who they can play doubles. They won the Aus Open doubles last year. That changes the dynamic significantly. That is there someone else out there that could potentially kind of handle everything?
Interesting. So the tournament's just been a debacle since then.
Yeah, look, it hasn't been great. I mean, when I found out, I think it was in early December, when they announced that the teams and who were going to be playing, I thought, you know what, I'll take a look at the Australia versus Spain. And you think, there you go, you know what, you probably get tickets. If you live in Sydney, you probably go get the kids to that. Kyrgios versus Nadal, De Minaur's playing, Tomljanovic's playing, Paula Badosa, top 5 in the world, they're all playing. You take a look at who actually played that tie. So obviously De Minaur played Nadal, so that was a cracking match.
Won.
Yep. So
great victory.
That was great. You move to the second day. So there were 3 ties to come. Keep in mind at this point in time...
So Nadal's been kicked out.
So Nadal's finished.
Yeah.
He was listed to play mixed.
Yeah.
But it was effectively at this point in time, neither team could make it through out of the group stage. It was 3 dead rubbers.
Ah.
So you've paid your money. You've put the Christmas presents under the tree with the tickets to go see Spain and Australia, and you've ended up watching Bouzas Maniero versus Gadecki and Kubler versus Ramos.
Who?
Exactly. So it is kind of trying to find that balance a little bit of, we've got all these big names, but if you're going to put them into dead rubbers and make them play... play for nothing. Of course, they're going to give the opportunity to these other players to get a little bit of cash and to get some ranking points because Nadal doesn't need it.
No, true. That's a good lay-in, mate. Good
How about
lay-in.
you?
I went to trivia last night, and the host was the worst host you've ever seen. That's in the lay-in. Like, getting the answers wrong, mixing up the questions, absolute lay-in. The man-cat in the cricket, that's been a top discussion point. Now, I used to be on the side of don't man-cat. But now that you see how far these batsmen are taking the P155 and taking ground and cheating, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
And I thought, I found that rule with Zampa's arm above the horizontal.
The point of release or
just, if he's out of the ground, stump him, get him out, man-cat him.
It's a bit like the underarm serve in tennis. Like people kind of frown upon it a little bit.
Where do you sit?
Do it.
Do it?
The technology in the tennis, like if you're going to serve, if you're going to stand that far back,
I like it.
You just have to deal with what comes across the net.
That's true. Yeah. And then we saw the Test cricket. Now, bad light stopping play at 2:30 p.m. in Sydney in the middle of January, the start of January. Get in the lay bin. Don't go off at 2:30 p.m. because of a bit of cloud. Harden up. Test cricket's for the viewer. They need to change the dial a little bit and think about the money. And you said it off air. You were watching and you flicked it off and you just play. How hard is it? Conditions, it's an outdoor sport, people.
Yeah.
Starts drizzling for 12 seconds. They go off and it stops raining. Cover's going on and off all day. Sydney weather, still in the lay bin. But, gee, it annoys me. Just play.
And it was annoying for us sitting at home. If you were there,
that's the point.
Sitting in the stands as well.
Imagine if you paid good money and you're sitting there, you'd just go to the bar, wouldn't you? Where do you sit on New Year's Eve? That's in the lay bin for me.
Yeah, I didn't get to midnight. I'll be honest. It's just...
We're getting old.
Yeah. I think I flicked on the 9:30 fireworks and...
Too funny.
Had a couple of drinks and that was it, really. Just, no.
Too funny. All right, let's get to some betting, mate. And obviously we're doing this before the draw, which makes it a bit tricky. And we'll touch on things to look for the draw. But we've got 2 pronounced favourites. Swiatek in the women's $2.70 at the moment, betfair.com.au. Sabalenka, $13.50. Garcia, $15. I don't know how to pronounce. Is it Jabeur?
Yeah, Ons Jabeur.
Ons Jabeur, $16.50. So they're the top 4 in the betting there. We'll start with the women's, but obviously in the men's draw, we've got a firm favourite who's back this year.
He's won his first match with immigration. Novak Djokovic. He's made his way into the
he didn't get
the
deported this year, Jocka. So he's short price favourite in the men's. We'll touch on all about him coming up later in the show. But women's, Iga Świątek $2.70. Backing or laying?
I am doing neither at the moment. I think that price, I'm fence sitting on that one just for now.
You right? Yeah.
Look, it is one of those ones that the weird part, I think, with the women's draw, it's very similar to last year when Ash Barty was at the top. However, I just don't think that Świątek has the same consistency that Barty had. So it's a little bit tricky to get too involved. She's still playing, lead-up tournaments. There's still a bit of water to go under the bridge between now and then. And I think that price is about right for a pre-draw. The reason why I said it's a little bit tricky with the women's is, the nature of the tournament and how it stacks up. There are a lot of women's players who can beat anyone basically on tour on their day. I just don't think they can do it for 7 matches in a row to be able to win the overall thing. So it depends on where they fall in the draw compared to Świątek.
So she's the one to beat.
She's the one
you want to be on the other side of the draw to her. Is that right?
Yeah.
So you meet her in a final and then anyone can win.
Yeah. So at the moment, Ons Jabeur is looking to be the number 2 seed.
Yes.
So you're looking at kind of the $16.50 there for her. You know that she's not going to face Świątek until the final.
Yep.
So that's kind of the key thing to work with. But then it's going to be kind of working quickly once the draw comes out to kind of figure out who else is around. And I guess, if I wanted to list just a couple of players.
So is she a bet? Sorry, is Ons Jabeur a bet at 16.50? Just knowing that.
Yeah, I think from a trading perspective,
we'll talk on trading.
Yeah, she does struggle a little bit with extreme heat that you can sometimes get in Melbourne in the back end of January.
Yep.
But looking at it overall, she's gone deep at Wimbledon, made the final of Wimbledon. She went deep again at the US Open. She's finding that consistency at the Grand Slams. I think she's one definitely to consider at that price.
Right. You were saying, sorry, before I cut you off rudely, other players to look forward?
Yeah, so in terms of Świątek and the players to kind of avoid, you want to see away from her, I think, in the draw. If you look around the lines of, Yelena Ostapenko, Katerina Alexandrova, even, Garbine Muguruza, Camila Giorgi,
pronouncing these.
Danielle Collins, there's all these players who can play that brutal, aggressive style of tennis that on their day, if they're redlining, everything's going perfectly, they become very difficult to beat. And they're the type of players that I don't think they can, if they're on the other side of the draw to Świątek, I don't think we need to worry as much. I don't think they're getting to the final. So I don't think they can provide that top level for enough matches to get to that matchup. What Świątek's done really well the last year or so is that she's kind of brought her lowest level, she's kind of brought that up a little bit. Yeah, right. So she's finding more consistency in her game
young,
overall.
Isn't she?
Yeah, she is. And
so that comes with age and experience.
It comes with age and experience. And I think for her, particularly, in the start of 2022, she was looking, Barty was the top player by the length of Flemington Straight. Then she pulls the pin and retires, and all of a sudden all the attention goes to Iga.
Nice little racing reference.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed that. I thought I'd give it a go.
That was good.
Yeah. So now she's the hunted, so to speak.
She won two tournaments in 2022.
Yeah, so she went on a ridiculous winning streak through kind of the middle of the year as well. I think when you look at her and you look at the players, she lost at the WTA Tour Finals to Sabalenka. It's another player who, has the potential to beat her. And I think if you're sitting there and looking at the 270. When we talk about the, working on the exchange a little bit later, there might be another option that you can consider maybe for Iga just to get a little bit more value than that 270.
Yeah, and we talked about this off air as well. The women's 3 sets, there's got to be more variance in a 3-set match, and the matches obviously, if an outsider of the two, if Iga Swiatek's playing number 50 in the world. Mm-hmm. And number 50 in the world takes first set off her, the odds change dramatically as opposed to a men's where best of 5. It evens out more in more sets. So the variance in a shorter tennis match makes the markets much more volatile.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why, and you see people who push for kind of Serena Williams to be considered the best player of all time. It's because she's won all these Grand Slams in the best of 3-set format. So she's needing to be on her game from the get-go consistently. And I think that's the thing with the women. So, if you look at Iga,
it's a good point, actually.
If she were to lose the first set of a match, her odds in the outright market are going to balloon out a little bit more than, say, if Novak were to do the same thing. Yep. Just because, you drop a set in the women's game and you're one set from, getting your plane home. So it's really trying to find that balance, particularly in the women's game. And that's why that 270 probably doesn't appeal from a backing perspective. But she's playing so well and she's so far, on her best, she can match it with anyone and beat anyone probably outside that top 50 relatively comfortably. So I think that's kind of a key thing to consider for her.
Interesting. So just wrapping up the women's, are we looking to back Ons Jabeur for $16.50, $17 with a trading perspective if she gets deeper into the tournament?
Yeah, and I think looking to then lay out probably when you get to that kind of quarterfinals, depending a little bit on the draw in that perspective. But, kind of scrolling down, if you want some other players who are a little bit further down in the market.
We want some things at big odds that we can trade out later in the tournament, please.
Well, one that I actually did put up on Twitter yesterday, but Marketa Vondrousova, she's kind of on the comeback trail. She didn't play in the back end of last year.
$70.
She's sitting at 70s. She was 100s yesterday, but she had a good win.
You've taken some of that.
Well...
Yeah,
just a little bit.
You can trade out now. You've already made your money for the tournament. So good.
When you're looking at those kind of players, particularly before the draw, she's the type of player that matches up against power hitters and players who are a little bit more defensive and can cover the court well. She's got kind of more. She's got a lot of tools to to use to be able to beat different styles. So she's probably one to consider. And the other one is Veronika Kudermetova from a trading perspective.
44 at the moment.
Yeah, snuck into the top 10 at the end of last year, and has looked really good in Adelaide this week. Knocked off Bianca Andreescu, who's won some Grand Slams. She was 4-love down in the first set and won 12 games in a row. Game over. So, yeah, very, very handy. But she's starting to find that consistency with her game, so she's one to keep an eye on as well.
So, Kudermetova and Vondrousova are the two at $44 and $70. Go and have a bet there. Take those and trade out later. And the other one, Ons Jabeur, at $16.50, $17 might be the three to play and trade. We're talking about trading.
Yep.
Let's get back to school. Now, trading on Betfair, it's unique in Betfair because Betfair is an exchange. It's like a stock market.
Mm-hmm.
So odds fluctuate. And the beauty of tennis is that the winners market fluctuates so much throughout a tournament depending on each game, which makes trading fantastic. Is that right? Is that what you do?
Yeah, and look, there's so many options.
Yep.
When you look across the course of the entire fortnight, and I think that's the thing of what I just want to talk about with Świątek. You're currently sitting at, to back her, you're getting $2.72, and to lay, you're getting kind of $2.78.
Yep.
If she were to find herself in the first week in a little bit of trouble in some capacity, it might be, her opponent serving for the set, or she's just started really sluggishly, or, for whatever reason it might be, that may creep out a little bit, beyond 3, up to 350. If she drops a set, maybe to 4. If you're watching the match, you can kind of keep an eye on it and just have the exchange open and just sit there and see what happens. But there is a lot of volatility, particularly if a player who is at the top of the market finds himself deep in a third set for the women's or fifth set for the men's. One way or the other, we're going to see some big moves. So I think, a great example was, a couple of years ago, Novak Djokovic was playing Taylor Fritz here, tore his abdominal muscle and was really struggling to even get around the court. I think that was the year that then they kicked everyone out at midnight or 11 p.m. or whenever it was that the crowd all had to go home. He got out to about 80s and 90s in the outright market, Novak. Came back and won that match and then went on to win the entire tournament. So, if you're aware of kind of what's going on and knowing that kind of Novak's got that level above everyone else and he's got a little bit of reserve to work with, that you can sit there and go, you know what, I didn't like Novak at...
Was he playing funny buggers?
Well, there is also that, but it is something to consider with a lot of these instances. I know...
And you, because you watch so much tennis, would be able to pick up...
You have an awareness of it. And, you could probably also pinpoint, Nick Kyrgios at Wimbledon last year. Everyone remembers that he made the final, but not many remember that I think he was down break points in the fifth set in the first round against a local UK player. And, his odds ballooned out a little bit. And there's these things that you can kind of pick up on that if you're sitting there, that you can start to try and find some better prices. So I think that's the thing of, using Vondrousova as an example at 70s, if you were to put money on that and she were to make it into the second week, that then you can lay and kind of use that potential winnings and, work your way through and try and get yourself in a position where, ideally you have a lot of green numbers ending up in your book when we get to the end of the fortnight. Yeah,
the old green book, and hopefully you can back high and lay low. It's an exchange and win that way, and that's the beauty of Betfair. So you can do that all on the click of a button at betfair.com.au. Don't forget to gamble responsibly. But if you take the 70s and she wins a couple of matches, Vondrousova, and comes into 40s, you've made money either way. You can lay her at 40s, and it's the beauty of Betfair, which is unlike any other WSP, which is fantastic. So that's trading, and that's the beauty of tennis as well, because it comes down a point, and the scoring systems makes it really interesting. So just trade on the Betfair futures markets, have them open while you're watching the tennis, and make small profit along the way, and just chip away at it, and it'll end up being big throughout the tournament. So that's fantastic advice there. Let's get to the men's, and we've got Novak Djokovic, $2.22 at the moment, betfair.com.au. Alcaraz, $8.60. Medvedev, $9.20. Nadal, $18.50, defending his title. Kyrgios, 23s, adds a lot of interest. And then you've got Holger Rune, which is an interesting young 19-year-old as well, $32. And Tsitsipas is firmed a little bit, $24. So plenty going on there. But is it Djokovic or bust? Is he the outright favourite, deserves to win? He's not seeded one, which adds a different element as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's sitting around that 220, 222 at the moment, and it's hard. It's a little bit like Świątek. It's hard to kind of go confidently into, backing into that for a fortnight at the moment off. He hasn't played as much tennis over the last 12 months. What we've seen from him has been fantastic. But we just, there's a couple of kind of late third set type moments. We saw, and you mentioned Holger Rune, beat him in Paris in the final there in 3 sets. I think that the best of 5 set dynamic really helps Novak, so long as it's not kind of 35 plus degrees, through the Australian Open at the start. I think that could potentially throw him off a little bit, having not played as much tennis. But look, I think this is probably going to be one of the more wide open Australian Opens that we've seen.
Seems like none of them have played any tennis.
Well, that's the thing.
Djokovic has been out for a while. Alcaraz is okay, but he's a bit injured, isn't he? Medvedev might be the form player who's played probably the most in the lead up. Nadal's getting old. Kyrgios hasn't played.
Yep. So, and that's what makes this a little bit tricky. But then I think the draw is going to be crucial with this. Right. So when you look at the live rankings at the moment, we've got Carlos Alcaraz at 1 and Casper Ruud at 2. Not the most, when you compare back to probably the last 15 years when that's mainly been filled by the likes of Nadal, Djokovic and Federer.
Yes.
Things look a little bit different now.
Which is good.
Which is good. And what makes it a little bit trickier is that Novak sits probably going to be coming in as the 5th seed. So he could fall into kind of any quarter.
Which makes it hard.
Which makes it a little bit tricky, but it means that that he's not going to fall into the same quarter as those who are 6th, 7th and 8th.
Right.
So you can kind of work around that a little bit. And one of those players is Daniil Medvedev.
Yes.
So that if you're going to jump into Medvedev at the 9s, that you're not going to get Novak until at least the semi-finals.
Yep.
Which becomes appealing. But yeah, like you said,
are you recommending a bet at $9.20, $9.40?
I would from a trading perspective.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that's the beauty of Betfair. It doesn't mean he has to win.
Yeah.
But he might be $5 at some point in the tournament. He might be $3.
And he becomes one of those players we saw last year, made it to the final, was 2 sets to love up on Rafael Nadal in the final.
Trade out.
And you can just find your spots with that. But yeah, like you said, it's really tricky because you look at those top names. Nadal hasn't won since the tour resumed. Kyrgios hasn't played except for some exhibitions since the tour resumed. Same with Alcaraz. He got injured at the end of last year. It is hard to marry up, and these players are going to go from playing not a lot of tennis straight into best of 5 in potentially some pretty warm conditions. So it is going to be a little bit tricky. But I think if you wanted to start before the draw, I think Medvedev's a good spot to look at. If you wanted to go a little bit lower down, maybe a Taylor Fritz around $44. He might be one to consider. And another one who's looked really good during the United Cup is Cameron Norrie, who probably would struggle in the kind of semi-finals or final, were he to get there against some of the other top names, but that he's going to provide that consistent level that you're looking for from a trading perspective, that he's not going to just kind of, you don't think he's going to blow up and really struggle in the first round against a lesser opponent.
Yeah, that's fascinating insight. Djokovic at $2.22 seems short.
Mm-hmm. If
he comes out and wins his first 2 matches, does he stay around the same price? Like he can't firm too much more until he gets gets deep into the tournament, can he?
I think, any firming that would come there is going to be dependent on if the kind of next 6 to 8 make their way through as well.
Yeah, true.
So
right.
Depending on the quarter, when you look at it, if he's in the same quarter as Nadal and Nadal gets knocked out in the second round, then he's going to come in because his projected path is going to become a little bit easier.
Yep.
But I think it's a really tricky one to kind of marry up because when you look at it, and like I said, Holger Rune and you've got Carlos Alcaraz who's coming in off not a lot of tennis. These players, they're both 19 years of age. They're having to turn up here, having not played a lot of tennis, to play best of 5 against a lot of these players who have got a decade plus experience under their belt at handling what's going to happen.
Yep.
It's really going to make for an interesting spot. And just with that, Medvedev being that player that will avoid Novak, Felix Auger-Aliassime is another one who will probably fall in a different quarter. So he's another one to maybe consider that, finish the year really, really strongly. Struggled in Adelaide, lost to Popper in first up, but I don't think that's a big issue. That 24s is probably tempting just from a small trading perspective.
Very good, very good. Any final thoughts to add before we get into your best bets or best trades?
Look, I think there's just, particularly through the Australian summer, there's a lot of players that will pop up onto screen that, people probably haven't seen before. And a couple of players to really watch. I've mentioned Holger Rune in the men's, but 2 others are Lorenzo Mazzetti, who's been playing for Italy in the United Cup and had a really impressive 2022 season. And Jack Draper from the UK, kind of fallen under the radar a little bit. Didn't come out here last year. He was playing Challenger level tournaments, ranked in the 200s, and now he's working his way kind of. He should be seeded at Grand Slams in the next couple of months.
Interesting. Well, he's a huge
there are a
price,
couple of
right?
players.
Your own price there.
Yeah, so there are a couple of players to watch.
Yep.
They're the players that could potentially, against these top players, kind of win a set or two. And, you always hear those stories every year. And Auger-Aliassime has been one in the last couple of years who, win a couple of sets against Novak or Medvedev or someone and just fall in 5. They kind of fall off a bit physically. I think they're probably the 3 players. So Draper, Mazzetti and Rune at Grand Slam level who will probably take their game to that next level this year.
Rune's only 19.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, he took... Rewind 12 months, he's in Australia playing and he's cramping at the end of third sets after playing less than 2 hours on court.
Yeah.
Go to November, he's playing Novak Djokovic in a Masters 1000 final and
Beating.
going toe-to-toe with him physically right until the very end and beating him in 3 sets.
Amazing.
So you see these players where you go, you know what, they're going to challenge and they're going to, their best is good enough. It's just about whether they can actually match it for that, across 5 sets against the best.
Yep. No, I assume that's a lot of the difference, along with the mental capacity and maturity, I guess. All right, let's get to your better bets before we wrap up.
Yep.
What are we doing? Talk to us.
So I think if we start with the women's, so from that trading perspective, just looking at it, so it's Marketa Vondrousova.
Yes.
At the 70s that's available at the moment. I still think that's good value. I think she is one that is going to be a threat as an unseeded player, and I think if she finds herself in the right part of the draw, that she could be able to knock off a seed and be able to make the most of the draw that was afforded to them.
Yep.
So I think she's probably the one that at the longer odds that appeals. So it's that trading play of Ons Jabeur, because we know that she's the number 2 seed. She's going to be on the other half of the draw to Świątek, and it's going to be a slightly smoother path for her compared to some of the other top names.
Yes.
And Veronika Kudermetova. So, another player. So she's seeded, so she should get a stronger start here and a more favourable draw than she's seen in the past. And she's playing some impressive tennis. I think she made 10 quarterfinals last year. She's showing that she's starting to put everything together now that she's in a kind of moving towards that mid-20s in age, and she's been around the tour long enough to know what it's all about. So I think they're probably some names to keep an eye on.
Yep.
If we get to late in the tournament, I think Sabalenka is a potential to knock off Świątek, but I don't think I can get involved in the 1350 that's available for her at the moment. I think I need to see her through the first week before jumping in. So those prices should still be quite long if Iga's still in the tournament.
Good advice. And head to betfair.com.au/hub as well. Find all the previews, because Steve will be running through when to back, when to lay off, talking all things strategy, trading throughout the tournament. So if you're questioning when to jump off or what prices to lay off when you got these Medvedev at 960 and he comes into 4s, do we lay off? What do we do? Head to betfair.com.au/hub and Steve will tell you all about it, or follow him on ace_previews. Men's.
Yep.
I just might have given it away. Is it Medvedev?
I think Medvedev at the current odds.
Yep.
Yeah. So you're looking at him, he's fit. He's playing tennis. He's ticked a couple of the early
sounds
boxes
obvious,
that you
but
really
not many
want.
players are.
Yeah. So, he is playing and looking at the current...
And he made the final last year?
Yeah. Looking at the current setup as well, I think that is the best scenario for him. He shouldn't fall into Novak's quarter of the draw, so should be able to have a slightly smoother run. Novak at that $2.22, probably a little bit short, but what I might, and I'll probably wait till the draw comes out. I'm probably going to keep him safe. So, when I look at my book overall, at the very worst, there's a 0.00 sitting next to Novak's name.
Yeah.
In the past, going into finals with a red number next to Novak's never overly enjoyable. So just trying to kind of keep him safe a little bit.
Yep.
And I may not do that all before the tournament. I might kind of set up a little bit and chip away and set up a $4 odds back that may get matched. There's a couple of things that you can consider there. And then looking further down, Taylor Fritz around that $44 is a decent trading option. If you want someone who's a little bit safer in terms of their level and performance and what they can produce, and you got 3 probably in Casper Ruud, Cameron Norrie, and even Alex de Minaur, you're kind of getting 200s, can potentially make the second week. You know what you're going to get from these players. They're going to give 100% effort. They're going to make it difficult for their opposition to be able to to beat them. They're the players that you want on your side when you're trading, particularly over the course of a fortnight.
Fascinating. Before we wrap up, we've got to be quick. Nick Kyrgios, obviously everyone talks about him. He's the most talked about tennis player, especially here in Australia. $23. He comes here not having played much tennis. Firstly, I think he's playing a practice match against Djokovic. They hated each other 2 years ago. Suddenly they're best friends. That's in the lay bin. What do you make of him in a sentence or two really quickly?
It's just difficult until you see him on court. I just don't think you can make a call until you see him physically play a match. And it's best of 5 on hard court. It's a little bit tougher on his knees. If he's got an ankle or a knee issue or whatever he's saying that it is, you're just going to have to wait and see, I think. And if you're getting involved with him at the start of the tournament, I think it's being aware or at least watching his matches, because you can see the mood shift and pivot on a dime when you're talking about Nick, and that you go,
good trading.
You might be able to potentially lay out of that if needed. But yeah, it's worth considering that, you know, his best can match it with anyone. It's just can he provide that for 7 matches in a row?
Good advice. You're the best in the business. Thank you so much for joining me, Steve. Been an absolute pleasure. Don't forget to head over to betfair.com.au/hub or betfair.com.au tennis markets. All the information from Steve will be out throughout the tournament and leading up. We've got 10 days or so to the start of the tournament. So thanks, Steve. Been a pleasure.
No worries. Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on Layback with Betfair.
Gamble responsibly. Call 1-800-858-858.